All right, so thank you for attending the webinar. My name is Chris St. Clair. I'm the literacy specialist at Marinacook High School. Just to give you a little bit of background, I have been in education for about 15 years, most of it as a literacy specialist. I've been a K through 8 literacy specialist and RTI coordinator, a middle school 6 through 8. I've been at the high school level now for 3 years. I've taught 8th grade, 2nd grade, and I've been brought into the social studies world through the high school department, and most recently did a cohort with Joe Schmidt at the Department of Ed. I think as an educator, my goal is to really build kids' self-esteem, especially as an RTI teacher, to have them believe in themselves. And my goal through social studies and through the guiding principles is to help students become clear and effective communicators, to through social studies, to do their research, to show them how to use their background knowledge, to give presentations, to be self-directed and a lifelong learner, to help kids generate questions and really work with those primary and secondary sources, to be a creative and practical problem solver. I really want them to draw their own conclusions and not be looking for the right answer, and to use their critical thinking skills. And hopefully in the end, it will get them to being that responsible, involved citizen. And I have a process that I have created probably through the last 7 years, working with all of the different grade levels, working through social studies, through English, through science. And I've narrowed it down to these 7 or so best practices that when I put them into place, kids really tend to be successful. So I set and define really clear goals using rubrics most of the time. Gradually release responsibility of the learning to the students. I model the expectations and make resources readily accessible to the kids. I very much focus on having students collaborate with each other and use their own voice. With the students that I've tended to work with, frequent check-ins are an absolute must. Constantly returning to the goals, because I want the students to realize that they have the information and that the teacher is not the sole owner of the information. And at the end, helping students reflect on what they did well and what they could improve on the next time. So I'm going to go through each of those and show you how I do that with the research process, in using the resources, and then also in the writing process. So the materials that I'm going to show you are based on the DBQ, the document-based questions that the high school has been using with most of our grade levels. So to start with, we typically start with the rubric. We don't just hand the rubric over to students. What we do is give them a hard copy. We go through what it means, ask them what they're new in, what's new on it, what's unusual, what they don't understand, what's surprising. And we hand kids a highlighter, and we expect them to be writing all over that rubric, so that by the time we're going over it, they have a really clear understanding of what it is not necessarily what it's asking them to do, but what's in the rubric, so that they can understand what the rubric is actually asking of them. Especially if it's something in writing, we will do what's called a rainbow analysis, which I will show you in a little bit, and compare a model of work to the rubric so that they can see what the success criteria looks like. And finally, kids tend to procrastinate, so we give it's a flexible timetable based on what we see with the kids, but we give a timetable for each step of the process. It might be for the whole project, it might be for the week, it might be for sections of what's happening during that day, and it keeps the kids accountable, it keeps the teachers on time, on track, and we don't want to allow the kids to get too far into the process and then realize they're not where we need them to be. And then, you know, it feels like it's too late to help, or to the kids, it feels like it's too late to catch up. All right, so one of the keys of what I've tried to do with all of my students and all of the classes that I've worked with is really gradually release responsibility to them. And I generally, for this process of analyzing documents, it's about a 3 or 4 period lesson day process. I will model for the students what the expectation is. We will then turn it so that the students are helping to create the work. And then the students will work together. And then the students will work in groups to teach each other. And then eventually they will work one-on-one. What I've done in the past to try to keep myself on track with this is I'll post percentiles in the corner of the room. And I will say, all right, today it's 100% me. You know, the next day it's about 75% me, 25% kids, until eventually it's 100% the kids. And I'll let the kids know that, you know, how much it's going to get eventually turned over to them. And I'm going to be there to support them. So they're okay. By the time it gets to where it's 100% them, they know it's coming and they're ready for it. It can be a time-consuming process, but it's definitely worth the time that goes into it. So what we have been working with, I've taken materials from, you know, workshops that Joe has presented, from my literacy background, from the social studies, and I've created a lot of pieces myself. I've borrowed things from the English department. So it's a 5-day process for us. We have about 76 minutes per class period, and the experiences that we've done this with most recently are freshmen and sophomores. So day 1, we introduce the rubric. We go through the Stanford History Education Group documents, which I have in a later slide. We go through the background essay all in one day. The next day, we do a rainbow analysis, which I'll show you. I'll model one of the sources, and then the second resource that we analyze, the kids will help me. So the first time through, I really want them to really listen and learn how it's done before they start chiming in, because we know there's always a couple of kids who will try to lead the conversation, and I want to give everyone a chance to sit and think. The next step would be partnering kids, and we do a lot of jigsaws. And I'll show you how I do that and how I track that. We'll finish, the students will corroborate information from the different resources as a class. And then the final step is they're going to try it on their own. And by the time they get there, they really are prepared to and confident that they can do this well on their own. All right, so the rubrics that we use, we've put together a mixture of the social studies standards as well as our writing standards. So we are asking kids to analyze their documents. We're asking them to evaluate historical events. We're asking them to write it in a structured format. And we are asking them to, you know, use their evidence and their resources efficiently. So as we go through this rubric, we are highlighting vocabulary words from the economics section, from the history section, showing them or having the kids maybe create examples from background information of things that they already know that might fit that rubric. The next thing we do is we take a model piece of writing that the DBQ program provides, and we have students analyze to see how it fits the rubric. And what we do, a lot of it feels more like an English class. We are looking for kind of the mechanics of putting together an essay. Do they have a thesis? Do they have claims? So in this example, those are highlighted in orange, which is why we call this a rainbow analysis. So we pick 3 different colors. So claims and thesis would be in one color. The evidence in this case is in yellow. The analysis is in pink. And then we have students, they each have a list of transition words and phrases, and they are asked to kind of go on a scavenger hunt and search for all of those transitions. We then have the kids analyze and see if the content and the structure fit the rubric. What we tend to do is find something that is not a perfect 3, because we want kids to see and to look at what could they improve on. We don't want to show them the absolute perfect because we don't really want to frustrate them, but we want to show them how easily they can take something that's solid and make it really great. In this situation, what we show them is the importance of the transition words and phrases. This example clearly does not have a lot of pink, does not have a lot of analysis, but the transition words tend to make up for most of it. And that's usually, for our freshmen, is a real big eye-opener. All right, so what I've newly added, being somewhat new to the social studies world, is the Stanford History Education Group resources. You know, in the past, we were asking kids to look for kind of the who, what, when, where, why. With this social studies focus, you know, looking for the sourcing, you know, who wrote this, what was their position during history, what was their purpose. It gets students much deeper into, you know, placing the resource in a context and understanding. So a lot of times we'll have to do a lot of background information, especially with the DBQs, depending on how much background information they will have. So we have a poster for each of these that we've taken off the Stanford site, which are posted in the room. This chart they would have a copy of for a kind of a quick cheat sheet. And what we've done to make this easier for the kids is created, using the basis of what the DBQ program starts with and has in the back of the binder, we then created our own 1-page version that takes kids through the sourcing contextualization, takes them through the close reading, and finally gives them a place to list the corroboration. And I have an example here from a student who I've known for about 4 years now, who really did not have a lot of self-confidence on their own, would probably shut down, but with the gradual release process, by the time that they got to this, they felt quite confident and were able to fill it out really, really thoroughly and had a good understanding of what that resource was looking for in relation to the question that they needed to answer. So part of our gradual release is to really give the kids the chance to take the lead. You know, they're the ones bringing their knowledge and their background knowledge, or looking up who the author is. We really want the kids to feel like they're the experts. We give them the chance to collaborate with each other, to lead discussions. So what I've been able to do is partner students to analyze a document with someone. So they're never initially doing this on their own. So they always have a partner, they always have a buddy to look at their resources with. And then once they and their partner are done looking at resources, what we did was make them into 3 groups. So we jigsawed them, we took we took our 7 groups and we combined them into 3 groups. And the teachers were fortunate. So we have the classroom teacher, and then I come in to help support this process. And we circulate and we guide the students, kind of keep them on track, maybe ask them some leading questions, but we are not the facilitators. We ask each student to take a document and go around the table and each facilitate their understanding and walk the rest of their group mates through the process of analyzing the documents, so that by the time they're done, each student has been responsible for analyzing 2 documents, but in the end, in this situation, they have 7 documents analyzed. So it takes a lot of the pressure off the kids initially when we hand out all the documents. We don't want them to shut down. We don't want them to get intimidated, but they realize they're only going to have to be responsible for a couple of them, and their classmates are really going to help them out. And it's really interesting to see the quieter students who don't always raise their hands, but in a smaller group, when they feel confident and they know that they've done a good job with their document, they're very willing to share that knowledge with their classmates. What we have found the most difficult aspect of analyzing these resources and primary sources has been the corroboration. They're really good at looking at individual resources. They struggle sometimes to see how the different resources connect to each other. The first time that we did this, we had things written all over the board. We had these crazy webs. The kids weren't really able to follow what the connections were between the different resources. The next time that I did this, because everything's a draft, so that the next time that we went through the same process with the next grade level, we created a document so that the kids could record their ideas. And this happened to be, this was a world history class with sophomores. So this was done as a class, and it gave the kids a chance to see everybody else's ideas, hear everybody else's ideas. Their ideas got put up on the board. I really like to give students voice and show that their information is important, show that it's valid by putting it on the board, putting it on a shared document, putting it on poster paper. And this really helped the students get to the analysis aspect, which is definitely the hardest, and it's the hardest thinking. But when one person would get going, the others would add to it, and it wouldn't feel quite as overwhelming. And then they have this as a resource to do the writing. So the sourcing, the analysis of the resources takes about a little bit more than half of our lesson time. We spend about 12 days overall on one of these DBQs the very first time that we go through it. And it takes less time, as they get older. We do it a couple times a year, but this first time we really spend about 5 or 6 class periods on the analysis and 5 or 6 class periods on the writing process, because we really want the kids to be successful with this the first time through. We don't want it to be overwhelming. So we go through a very similar process once the kids are ready to do their writing. We return to the rubric again. Now that they've seen all of the information, we want them to have fresh in their mind what it is that they need to accomplish. What do they need? What information do they need to cover in government, or what do they need to cover in history? So now they are ready to write a thesis, and then we ask them to sort their documents, We do another analysis before they start writing, and we have a process for gradually releasing the support. And finally, we leave them as the editors. We do a rainbow edit, and we leave them as the final editors. We do not collect all the papers, edit for grammar, edit for content, and turn it back for them to make their corrections. We really put them in the driver's seat. So let's see. All right, so when kids, after we've sorted, we've gone back to the rubric, they know what it is that they're trying to prove, we start out not with jumping right into writing the introduction, but the first thing that I do is have every student write down their thesis. And we go around and we check their thesis. Before they move on from there, we make sure that their thesis is going to address what the rubric is going to score them on. Because we don't want them to write, spend 3 or 4 days in class writing this essay and put a lot of time and energy into it and feel really proud of it to find out it didn't really meet the rubric. So we make sure that their thesis is in the right direction, that ideas aren't too similar or aren't kind of way off the charts where it's not going to get them the grade that they need to earn. We then have them take each claim that they've taken in their thesis and copy and paste that, further down the page. We then have them take their documents. This one was a freshman DBQ on the Chinese water crisis. And we have them take which documents that they're going to use to support their claim. And we have them put them in order. B, people moving to the city is going to lead to C, an increase in water, which is going to lead to E, polluted water. So we want them to start to make the connections between the resources. What we find, it's interesting, we find that the students who tend to struggle with this type of assignment like to list evidence. What we found with the honor students is they like to talk about the big ideas, and they've got these great critical thinking paragraphs, but there's very little evidence to support it. What we found with going through this process is that we get the two types of students to meet in the middle. They have the concrete ideas, and this is at least getting those weaker writers to start the analysis process. So this is my version of the old-fashioned outline. So after they have their thesis ready to go, they've got their evidence, we take a look at a paragraph. And I usually pull one from a year before or another class, if I have one class that's ahead of another. And we take a look and see how did another student in their very own school create their paragraph. Where's their claim? Where's their evidence? How have they used their transition words? Do they have analysis that ties their evidence back to their thesis? And have they concluded with some kind of transition to the next paragraph? So this example is actually a pretty solid example. A lot of times I will even pull one that's not a great example, and I'll have the kids help edit it and make suggestions. And then we leave them with this. It is either in Google Classroom or they have a hard copy of it, but they always have access to any of the models or resources that we've used so that they're not constantly asking the adult in the classroom for help, but we can direct them back to their resource. And it's amazing how many times the students will pull out these models and compare it back and forth and look for the transition words and see how, another student has introduced their information or started their analysis. They really use these as resources, The one downside is they need to have enough room where they're doing the writing to be able to pull all these resources out and look at them. So conferencing and tracking progress and individual feedback is something that I put a lot of time and effort into, because I know that the students who I'm working with would 100% do their best to avoid the work as much as possible. So we have 2 or 3 different ways to track the progress and give kids feedback. The top example is we use Google Classroom, and in between classes, as we know, we've given kids maybe a paragraph or 2 to write during that class period. So we're going to go back into Google Classroom and we're going to look at those couple of paragraphs that they wrote and see if they are meeting the criteria. And you can see this teacher went in and noted, the student didn't use enough resources. Now that I'm looking at it, I can see they ended their paragraph with a resource, which, we've taught the kids they need to have an analysis at the end. They can't end with a piece of evidence. It might be simple things as grammar. The last comment is, connecting, make sure everything goes back to their claim, make sure all their information goes back to their thesis. The bottom chart, which is partially covered up, is I will take the students' names and the small pieces of the writing process and track where they are. Just walk around with my laptop. They've got that paragraph done. They get a yes, or they get a check mark. If it's orange, it's done, but maybe it's half done, or it's not really well done. If they're absent, or if they just did not work that period, I'm tracking it. They know that I'm tracking it. And it really puts some accountability onto the kids. They know what needs to be done. And it also helps me to track their progress, because I know who I need to give some interventions to. I know who I need to work with during a study hall. I know who I need to catch up. I can gather whatever resources are available in the building, if it's the special ed teacher, if it's the interventionist, and make sure they're getting the support so that they're not really falling behind. I think the student who's there in red was sick or absent. But it really helps us keep track of where kids are, and it helps prepare for conferences, because we've looked ahead and we know where kids are, and we can get to more kids quickly during class when we have access to them. And it makes the kids realize they're accountable for a piece of work, and if they don't get it done, people are going to notice, and we're going to help them get it done. All right, so when they are done, we have them go back, and just like they did a rainbow analysis of that very first model, we have them go back and do a rainbow analysis of their own piece of work. And again, before we do that, we spend maybe 5 minutes going over the rubric to have that fresh in their mind. They are, it's not something they're accustomed to being independent with, so we're teaching them how to be independent with the rubrics. So once it's fresh in their mind what it is they needed to accomplish, we have them go through, see if they have the information, see if they have the structure, and then we ask them to go back and make revisions. And from looking at this one, I would have hoped that the student realized their analysis all came at the end, and maybe try to add, and they ended with a piece of evidence I see, so they would hopefully recognize that and go back and do some editing before turning in their final draft. So when they do turn their final draft in, we have them print that final draft, especially when it's the first one of the year, and we have them attach their rubric to it. And the reason we have them go to a paper copy is that when we do this again later in the year, we will return that original, that first attempt back to them. And that way they can review what they did well, and they can see what they need to work a little bit better on, and they can set their goals for the next research process that they're going to do for a class. All right, so overall, we found this to really be quite successful with students. We've been able to take what could be a really overwhelming process of, 3 weeks of putting together a research project and break it down into manageable pieces. The students know there's constant support. They're never completely on their own. They're really comfortable asking for help and support and asking someone to just check and make sure they're on the right track. We've set clear goals. They understand what the success criteria looks like. And we really tried to build in student voice and collaboration among students. This is not an individual sit by themselves process. In fact, when they're doing their writing, they're frequently overheard asking each other for ideas on how to present their information or how to use their evidence. So this piece of work comes from a freshman who had been an RTI student of mine 3 years earlier as a 6th grader, and had come to us still with a lot of work that needed to be done. And what we really found was that they had the skills, they didn't have the confidence to believe that they had the skills. But through this process of gradual release and all the other pieces that we have in place for student research, they were able to write a solid 4 pages and earn a very high score. And they left the process feeling very successful and really proud of their work, stating, they had never, ever written that much, but we'd broken it down into manageable chunks. So it just happened pretty easily for them. So as a review, to go back to the very beginning, what we really try to do through this research process is combine setting really clear goals, gradually releasing responsibility, modeling expectations, and making all of the resources really accessible, expecting student collaboration, wanting to hear their voices, frequently checking in, returning to the goals, and then supporting their reflection so that they can continue to move forward and grow with their research skills and their writing skills. So what I found is the kids almost invariably show me something that I had not learned. So I've used these resources now for 3 years, and every time I go through this, the kids are constantly coming up with an idea that I had not thought about, a viewpoint of a resource that I'd not noticed. And it's fun. They know that I am not the person holding all the answers, that it is something that we are doing collectively and that we're going through the process together. And every time that I do this, I add a new piece to the lesson that improves some aspect that wasn't working great. And I'm constantly challenging the kids to, outwork me, to find ideas that I hadn't noticed, to make better connections. At the very end of a DBQ on the plague, going back to the guiding principles, I had a student who, coming into us as a freshman, was not the most independent thinker. At the end of the DBQ process, in a small group conversation where she felt very comfortable, she was able to make a connection to the vaccination issues that we're having currently. So it really does support students in becoming critical thinkers and believing in themselves. and feeling comfortable with their peers and comfortable trying new things. So I think at this point, I don't know what questions have been placed out there, but we certainly have about 15, 20 minutes. If you have any questions, I can go ahead and answer those right now.